Are we feeling Elul? Are we feeling the month prior to Jewish New Year? Anybody feeling it yet? We discussed it last time. But certainly it's a time of, anticipation, and the inspiration of high holidays is already upon us. I mean, we're heading that direction fast. I wanted to talk about some things in the reading this week, important messages, which are, of course, related to this time because it's just a time of truth. It's a time of getting back to basics. It's a time of, thinking about what's really important in life and getting more serious about it. Really, a person can do that at any time, but it just happens to be this is the most auspicious time for it right now. And so everything we're going to say tonight, I think will bear some relation on that, simply because, almost any Torah insight that has to do with proper conduct and moral lessons is going to have to do with this month. And it's going to give us extra ammunition and extra energy and fuel to move forward in this month, heading towards the Jewish New Year. And obviously, it's not just the Jewish New Year, because it's described in the liturgy for Rosh Hashanah, for the Jewish New Year, that all human beings pass just like the sheep pass before the shepherd, and he counts them. So too, all human beings pass before God on the beginning of the year in judgment. So it's a time really for everyone. In fact, the Midrash tells us that the idea of the lulav and the esrog, the myrtle branch, the palm leaves and the citron, or the other four species. One of the things the Midrash says, you probably heard about it, is that it represents the Jewish people's victory in judgment over the nations of the world. Now, obviously, I think we can understand from that it also includes Bnei Noach also. It also includes those who come close to Israel and also following, who bound themselves to Israel through spiritually following their path. I think that also plays a role. The idea of the nations of the world in a spiritual sense has to do with, the negative energy of, following negative passions, what things represent in a spiritual sense, particularly. Anyway, but my point is, that sounds like a little bit of a negative point. Again, sitting here with Bnei Noach and people of the nations, but what I was trying to bring out is that we see from this that the nations are also judged during this period, because the Midrash is saying that the children of Israel, the Jewish people, come out victorious. So that means everybody, this is a time of judgment for everybody. So therefore, and certainly it's a time, where they know if therefore as individuals can stand out. And obviously Hashem judges fairly. And not only that, just the other side of the coin is that obviously Hashem is also more scrupulous and more exacting from how he judges Israel than he judges other nations. So it's a responsibility. All right, but anyway, this isn't really so directly related to what I want to speak to. This is all an introduction. I want to talk about today is that this is a weekly portion and some lessons that we can learn from it that I think are important and I wanted to share. So the first thing is, the first verse states, when you go out to wage war on your enemy, and the Lord your God hands your enemy into your hand, and you take captives. That's the first verse. So, so this had biblical, how do I say, practical application. And it could be it has some application today, but in the Messianic era will have application. Hopefully not. Hopefully no one will have the desire for this, as we'll see soon. It's not really it's not a recommended situation for someone to be in, that they should, as the next verse says, see among the captives a beautiful, a nice looking woman, and he should desire and take her for a wife. That's not so super desirable, at least according to what Rashi brings from the sages, right? But we'll get to that in a moment. But the question is, what is the application of this now? What's the application of the idea of going to war in a spiritual sense? So, in a spiritual sense, it's going to war against a person's evil inclinations, against a person's poor character, right? That's the spiritual metaphor in ways. A mitzvah has its physical, technical application, and also has spiritual applications. Every mitzvah has that. So there's these lessons that we can learn from here, and we see that person in this case goes out to war against his enemies. We're talking about his bad character traits, and God guarantees that if a person goes out to war in order to overcome his bad character traits, that he will succeed. Not only that he will succeed, but he will take captives, which means that whatever good energy is in these character traits that can be brought over to holiness, that can be reapplied for good purposes, you'll accomplish this. You'll not only control your evil inclination if you seek to change them, and you, so to speak, go to war against them, work hard, use your force of will and a plan and so on to change, but also, not only will you be able to restrain yourself, but not only that, you actually will improve your good traits by adopting the good elements of these bad character traits into yourself. So along this same idea follows what Rashi says in the first verse, which is that we're talking about here, we're not talking about what's called a milchemes mitzvah. We're talking about milchemes arishus. What does that mean? So milchama or milchama means a war, right? So milchemes mitzvah means an obligatory war. That means against the 7 nations that occupy the land of Israel, occupy Canaan. That's an obligatory war to remove them, destroy them, etc. If they don't flee, to eradicate them completely, right? This is not talking about such a war. This is talking about a war that's waged against a nation beyond the borders. As Rashi explains, because if we're talking about one of these 7 nations, how could it say that you're taking captives? We don't take captives. So it couldn't be from the 7 nations. Even though I believe Rashi says elsewhere that if the 7 nations, if they abandon idolatry, and they come to make peace with Israel, I think I have seen that even Rashi agrees that they can be accepted. But generally speaking, it's said that there's a dispute between Rashi and Nachmanides whether the 7 nations have to be eradicated, or if they convert, whether they can be accepted. Because in last week's reading, we said that you cannot leave them alive because you're going to learn from them. Nor you shouldn't learn from all their abominations. You have to completely destroy them. So from this, it sounds that if they repent, then you'll have to take them in. In fact, yes, Rashi says that exactly on the verse. In chapter 20, verse 18, he says that They have to be destroyed in order that you shouldn't learn from them. Says Rashi. You see, therefore, we learn that if they repent and they convert, you're permitted to take them. And obviously, in other words, you don't have to put them to death. So it's really all based on this need not to, that they shouldn't have a bad influence on the Jewish people in Israel. Okay. But in any event, this is talking about a voluntary war. So this led me to an interesting conclusion that what is the spiritual meaning of this? That this war is a war of voluntary. It's not obligatory. So we have this distinction between different character traits, or I should say different types of negative behavior. There's negative behavior that's forbidden completely. And there's negative behavior that's not part of holiness, and therefore is really kind of not recommended, but not forbidden. Not outright forbidden, right? In other words, let's take gluttony, for instance. What I mean is someone eating just for the sake of pleasuring themselves or drinking more wine or something than needed. These are qualities that are frowned upon, but not forbidden anywhere. The Bible doesn't forbid that. So, in any one of the different types of vanities or lusts that are out there, they're not forbidden per se. Forbidden in certain extreme circumstances, like adultery, like incest, or eating certain foods that are abominable for an Israelite to eat, or again, or eating food for Ben Noach that is the ripping off of a limb of an animal without treating the animal properly. So those are things that are outright forbidden. But the other things are not forbidden. Overeating, but really just to eat in order to just gain pleasure and not for the purpose of health, in order to serve God, not for the sake of heaven, but for the person's own pleasuring their body, pleasuring their feeling good, just indulging. So this verse spiritually is going more on those traits, that you need to control those traits. The ones that are forbidden, as Rashi explains. So the ones that are outright forbidden, those have to be rejected completely. And there's no captive taken, so to speak. In other words, you can't adopt anything from them at all. However, from these types of pleasures, in those cases, a person should go to war with them and restrain themselves. However, there's an aspect of them that can be used for good. For example, what's an example? Eating on Shabbos, eating on the Sabbath. That even if a person indulges a little bit, that's a positive. A person indulges in order to get into a better mood, in order to feel more relaxed, in order to study Torah better. That could be putting it to good use, etc. So that's the spiritual meaning of this verse, is that when it comes to forbidden things, they're completely rejected. When it comes to things that are not forbidden but not recommended, those things a person should restrain themselves. However, there are places when they are appropriate, right? So that's our first lesson of the day. So we go on to say here, but just in general, this whole discussion here, this whole little chapter on the story of the beautiful captive, her story, the story of how the Torah seeks for a person to behave with her, is a tremendous lesson. And it's also related to this idea. It says that he sees her and he desires her, and he takes her for a wife. He brings her into his house. He should bring her into his house. He should shave her head and let her fingernails grow long, and then take off her attractive clothing that she was wearing near the battle. And she should sit in your house and she should cry over her mother and father for a month. And then you can already have relations with her and she can become your wife. So And then it says, finally, if after all that you don't desire her, you should let her go. Don't keep her as a servant. You should just let her go after you put her through all that suffering. You should let her go. So this is a wonderful law in so many different ways. Obviously taking captives and for slaves, and even for, how do I say, slaves for, as they used to use the word, it's not so common anymore, but fornication was not uncommon, like in the Roman era and so on. This is things that people that the nations did. And they're saying here, no, you can't, we don't do this. You can, first of all, the first lesson is there's no ravaging the woman in the war, on the battlefield or around the conquered areas. He can take her, but not live with her, not be intimate with her. Takes her into his house. And then he puts her in a situation where she's not attractive anymore. Shaves her hair off, lets her fingernails grow long. All right, maybe, some people think long fingernails are attractive, but I think the point is that to grow in a way that they're unkempt, not being, how do I say, sculpted. And her nice clothing is taken off. So what is there? So there's some amazing lessons here. First of all, the first lesson is the person has the desire, push it off. Don't do it right away, right? What is the first thing the Torah is saying here? You want this woman? Not now, later. Don't have relations with her. Don't jump on that feeling right away. Take her, and second of all, also put it in its proper place. Don't just, have relations with this woman. You need to take her for a wife. So that's two points. But the foundational point is person has some kind of a passion and a desire, a physical craving. Wait with it. Don't do it right away. What a tremendous lesson. That's really seems like what's the lesson here. The second thing is to take it out of its attractive, how do I say, it's theatrical display. Take it out of its attractive display and see it in more negative, in more maybe realistic really terms. In other words, so this woman, okay, you really want her? What about if she's not so attractive and wearing her, she's not, what if she's not wearing her clubbing clothes, right? She's not wearing her attractive clothing and all that stuff, and her hair wasn't just done or whatever. You're still interested? But similarly, it's actually brought in ethical works and so on that a person should try to, minimize. I guess this is more directed to men than women, and it's almost all women here, but it says something that a person should minimize his, how do I say, his, I don't know if fascination is the right word, but try to minimize his attractiveness to women by realizing how all these type of pleasures, they all come to naught. Everything, the body itself, rots away. So in other words, to take away some of the charm. And that's basically what he's doing here. He's taking all the charm out of the attraction of this woman. I mean, if this guy still is interested in her after all this, then maybe there's something more to this. If after all this, because usually people who are, self-centered with desire and so on, first of all, it's at the time that they feel the desire. Once they don't feel the desire, they're not interested. They don't care about the person at all. It's over, goodbye. That's number one. So number two, if the woman doesn't look attractive, the guy, many men, they lose interest. So here he has to wait. The woman is losing so much of her qualities that would give her beauty, right? And then not only that, she's crying. We all know that men just love it when women are in the house crying all the time. It's one of their favorite things. Not really. It's not a guy's favorite thing that, it's not something that men really like really a lot. It's not something, well, just in general, it's not a romantic experience, when the other person is crying and sad, right? I mean, psychologically, people are attracted to, fun, right? In other words, at least the evil inclination wants fun, wants somebody playful, happy, etc., right? So all these qualities are deterrents to this person, being attracted to her out of lust and passion. They're removing all those externals away, and if he still wants her after all this, then, and even if he's still attracted to her after all this, but still it's not half as much as powerful it was when he started. So again, the lesson is from this of different means, different strategies in order to control forms of lust and physical desire and so on. We're saying again, as a person should wait. Second of all, to kind of belittle and minimize the importance of these things, the excitement of whatever it is, a different thing the person's desiring, whether it is a physical passion, or whether it's eating, or whether it's whatever it may be, or even if it's some type of ego type of thing, whether it's popularity. Also, a person should delay it and also let themselves realize what's really, also look at the reality of it and how immaterial it really is, and think about the popularity, in how do I say, to minimize it, take off its outer beautiful garments, and not, in other words, so not to think about the charm that it has. Think about the negative parts, how people will, interfere with the person, you won't have a private life. Think of all the downsides in order to minimize, to try to get the person himself not to have these negative desires. Any questions or thoughts about that?
I do have a question, Rabbi, about he brings the woman home, and this 30 days goes by, and he decides he is no longer interested in her, and it says he's to let her go.
Yeah.
What happens to her? Does he have no responsibility to her to make sure she's got food and shelter? I mean, he's taken her away from her family, which they may even be dead.
Yeah.
She's in a strange land. So what happens to her?
It's a very good question. Very, very good question. I don't know. It doesn't seem like the Torah here, what is called, it doesn't require a going away present as it does for Israelite servants. But the decent thing to do would be to give her something on her way out. If not, the community would be responsible to provide, if someone is impoverished, the community would be responsible to provide for her. Another question is does she convert? Doesn't say that. She cries over her parents. And also, the thing is, when it says I guess when it says that he doesn't desire, he doesn't want her, it seems like that's before they have relations and before he takes her as a wife, right? Yeah. So it doesn't say. Now, if this is talking about that he marries her, then obviously he'll have obligations to her as a wife, And so that comes interesting question whether the ketubah would apply to this woman or not. I mean, there's different opinions about a ketubah, whether it's the monetary obligation a husband has. Is that something biblical or is that something rabbinic? There's a difference of opinion about that. Yeah, it's a good question. It's a good question. It would appear from the verses alone that he doesn't seem to have any obligation to, and the community would have to, again, she'd be able to take part of different, forms of charity that are available, the corners of the field and so on and so forth, the tithe given to the poor and things like that. She'd be able to take advantage of, because she would, at the very least, I think she would be converted, and if not, at least be have to keep like a ger toshav. So it's very unclear. It's very unclear. But I have, from what I understand, I think that she's converted before the marriage, so she's already a Jewess, and then she'd have all the rights and privileges and responsibilities that come with that. That's another question. If she's forced to convert, what if she doesn't want to convert? It's only 30 days. If after the 30 days she rejects it, so then what? So then she becomes a ger toshav. Then she becomes a resident alien, a resident sojourner, should say, and she has to keep the 7 laws. And she'll still be, yeah. What?
She be permitted to go back to her home country?
I believe, yeah. She's free to go wherever she wants at this point. That's what it means. And the verse says, you send her out. Send her out for herself, so that she's completely independent. That's what the verse means. You send her out free. She can go wherever she wants. But it's a good question. Very, very good question. Okay. Now, from this, any other questions? I guess that's it. Yes? Okay. I mean, this whole story, though, these laws, they are the sages, how do I say, they discourage this whole thing. And Rashi brings out this is only God, the Torah permitted this because of a person's, inclination. And in the end, it's not going to be good for him, which is interesting because and that's the connection between the different chapters, the next portion of this portion. I'm not saying in the next reading, but this week's coming reading, in the very next segment, it discusses a man has 2 wives, one of them that he's fond of, and one of them he really dislikes. And yet, the one he dislikes has his firstborn. So that one, the firstborn, has to receive the double portion as the Torah allots. He can't say, no, I want to give the double portion to the son of the woman that I love more. Can't do that. The firstborn is your firstborn. So, what are the lessons we learn from this? Right? So the first obvious important lesson is that it seems the Torah is teaching us that we follow a rule of law. What do I mean by that? Is if the law is, the law is blind. You like who you like, but the law says that the firstborn gets a double portion, he gets his double portion. That's it. You don't look at his merits. You don't look at, in other words, what if this firstborn, what if his mother is really not a terrible wife? What if she's a terrible person? I mean, maybe he has good reason not to like her. Maybe she's not a nice person. And maybe the son isn't a nice person. Yeah, the Torah says, no, this is the rule. He is your first child. And that gives him a specific importance. The verse says it. It says, he is the first of your strength. And therefore, the law of the firstborn goes to him. So there's some kind of a value in the fact that it's the person's first child. It comes from his first seed, of this particular male Israelite. And that's something that doesn't matter. He's entitled to the double portion. So that's an idea of what we call today the rule of law, as opposed to, caprice, where a person just decides arbitrarily, or not arbitrarily, but based on how they feel things should be. But there's a rule, and you have to follow it. So that's the first thing that I see from this, which the Torah is trying to teach us, that when halacha gives a rule, you can't, you don't start making other reasons that maybe I shouldn't, maybe the other person's better, and so on. No, this is the rule, you stick with it. And the Torah also says that there's good reason for this. You may not see it. You have your own, you're affected by how you feel because of maybe how you're treated and so on. But the fact is, there's a good reason for this, which goes deeper than what you feel right now. And that is the fact that this child is your first strength, so to speak. That's what the Torah calls it. The same language is used by Reuben, actually, that Jacob gives a blessing to Reuben, his first son. He also says that Reishisoni, you're the first of my strength. That's what a firstborn is called. It's the first of the father's, seed. So that's one point. The second point is the lesson of the chain of events that our sages say follow from the first act of taking in this woman out of desire. This chain of events. And it's a fascinating point because it's something we have to keep in mind. It's a very helpful tool, and it's a truth that we have to know, that because in other words, there's a long-term, weighing the short-term gain against the long-term loss, even emotionally and physically, where the person is looking towards this world. So the Torah tells us this person that you desired so much, you're going to hate them in the end. That's what the sages say. Why does this segment follow the segment talking about the beautiful woman? Because eventually you're going to hate this. You're going to despise this woman. You're not going to like her anymore. So first of all, this is fascinating because it's saying that not only is there like divine providence in events that happen around us, divine providence even affects the way we actually feel about things. And that's fascinating, right? They're saying you're not going to like her. It's not saying she's going to be mean to you. Your feelings are all going to change. You're not going to like her anymore. So that God has a control, and there's a cause and effect. And when we do something wrong, that it causes division. It causes resentment. And the person won't like her after all. Now, maybe part of it will be because, he met this woman. This woman was promiscuous, was trying to seduce men. That's how he found her in the first place. And maybe, this is conjecture. It doesn't say this. It says he just won't like her. It doesn't say the reason. But maybe he'll continue to suspect her, and she because she's that type of woman, he's eventually the same reasons that attracted his lower elements of himself. The same reasons eventually he's not going to like her, right? You're looking from a practical point of view. The person starts out, she's so seductive and everything, and then those same qualities. Now he's afraid that she may be an adulteress. Now he doesn't like her anymore. So, but anyway, that's possible. It doesn't say that in the source here, but it could be that just from a practical standpoint, that's one of the things that might happen. But the point is this chain of events, and it keeps getting worse. And that it says, because you did this, you took in this woman and you followed your desires instead of following what was of value. So you're going to end up hating this woman. And then the child that you bear will be a rebellious child in the end. That's the result of all this. One thing leads to the next. So this is such an important rule that we have to understand that the end result of sins create a snowball of bad events. That we have to have repentance to stop. The only person needs to repent somewhere in here until that this shouldn't lead to this final result that we have here, which is the rebellious child, the rebellious son, right? And it's interesting, and it makes so much sense, because what does the rebellious son do? The rebellious son, it says that he rebels and rejects the instructions of his parents. His parents can't control him, and they bring him to the judges of the city, sages of the city, and they tell him this child is refusing to follow us, is rebellious, and also he's gluttonous and a drunkard, right? So that's the qualities that he gave into to begin with. He gave into a sign of gluttony, a kind of hedonism in regards to his wife, to the woman, and that eventually led to a son that quality got much worse, where he gives in and he's out of control. He doesn't control his inclinations and his passions. He's just he's gluttonous. And it says it's going to come to the point that he's going to become a thief and a murderer. And because of that, that's why the judgment is to put him to death before that happens. It's a very, very unusual law that we should do anything to someone before they commit it. We don't find any other place such a thing. Before you commit it, you can't punish someone before they commit a crime. What do you mean? In fact, we know the famous midrash in regards to Ishmael, when he was a child, and the angel said, and God, was thinking, should he save him? Not so to speak thinking, of course, God knew what he was going to do. But the point is, there was discussion of what was the justice, and the prosecuting angel said, you're giving him water. His descendants are going to kill your children. Are going to kill the Israelites. They're gonna make them die of thirst in the desert when they're sent into exile from Babylon, by the Babylonians. And you're going to give them water. And what does God say? God says no, but that doesn't happen yet. Right now he's righteous enough. He deserves to be saved. I'm going to save him. So if that's the case, so why over here we say, he's going to be no good later on? What's the difference between that story and this story? Why are we punishing? Because things not done yet. I mean, the simple difference you can make is that that's talking about children, not himself. I mean, that's an open distinction you can make. But at the end of the day, we say over there, the conclusion is, I judge him how he is right now. It's not that he himself, even if he himself would be different later, it doesn't say he would have been judged differently. So, but it seems that this is being done. First of all, I mean, the sages say this is a very unusual. There's a lot of technicalities. According to the oral law, this is almost impossible for this to happen. It says that the voice of the father and the mother has to be the same pitch and sound the same, which is almost impossible, almost never. I mean, when does that happen? It's almost zero. So this never is really carried out because according to the oral law, the conditions for it are so tight, it's really virtually impossible. But nevertheless, let's still look at it, just purely on the verses, and let's try to understand it. In fact, the sages also say he's killed because of his end. In other words, he's not killed as a punishment. In the case of Ishmael, the question was, should he be saved? It was a question of whether he was worthy to be saved. Here, it's not whether he's worthy to be saved. The question is the opposite. He's going down such a bad path. The question is, isn't it more compassionate to stop him now before he gets worse? Before he dies a terrible, wicked person and loses his portion in the world to come? That's really the question. Here, it's more similar here to the story of what was his name? Chanoch. The story of Chanoch during the flood. It says there, Rashi brings that Chanoch disappeared. And it means that he was taken by God, it says. Why was he taken? It says he's no longer because God took him. So Rashi, the sages say, why was he taken? It says because he was righteous, but he was weak and he was liable. He was very easily fell back to wickedness. And so God took him before he had a chance to be a recidivist into evil ways. So that's what's going on here also. This is punishment, so to speak, I should say. This that his life is to be taken is in order that he shouldn't end up in a much worse position later, because the path he's going on is so bad and is such a young boy. Point is, since he has no history and habit of self-control, which is an absolute requirement in order to follow Torah. A person has to exert, recall the yoke of heaven and exert his mind over his body to control it. That's the number one beginning to serving God. All the other feelings of love and fear of God come later on. First, the person has to use their mind and force of will in order to accept the yoke of heaven and not to sin. That comes first. This person has none of that. The person has habituated himself that his evil inclination is complete control. He's giving into, all his desires. That's the implication of it. And when his parents, who represent more his conscience, right, are saying don't, he doesn't listen to them. He has no fit. So this is this beginning is basically, showing us that this individual, his chances of change are zero. I guess you could say that that's why there are all these particular exact conditions, in that for most people, even if you're really this bad, there's always hope. But there are certain cases that there isn't any hope, where the Torah says that's it. This person, the chances are so small that it's even more than that. Rashi says, the Torah looks to the end that this person is going to end up being a murderer and a robber. It's almost like a sure thing. That's what's going to happen. And so this is like what do they call that? What do they call a mercy killing? I mean, we don't really do that, but this is something like that, a very unusual case. So that's one thing. That's what our sages seem to say is a simple approach. I think there's also, looking at it from a legal perspective as an attorney, you could say there's also another point here, which is the deterrent factor. So the sages say that they give us all kinds of conditions, and they say that they don't say this really can't happen. They just say that their voices have to be the same, and they have to both be able to, hold on to this boy, and he has to specifically eat a certain amount of meat and a certain amount of wine. So it's not like every case of a kid who's rebellious. It has to be a very distinct certain case. They also say that it only can be during a certain very limited age, in which the child is just, from the beginning of his maturity up until he becomes full sexual maturity, and that's it. So it's like, it's maybe from 13 and a half, or from 13 to 4. It's a very limited amount of time also that this is the case. And if you think about it, a kid that young behaving like this is pretty bad. It's a little bit like he's a psychopath. I mean, it's a little bit extreme. But in any event, I think there's another point here, and that is that if you think about how things are supposed to be and were in biblical times or in the Roman era, is that the written law was studied and taught to the children, right? And not necessarily with all the oral commentary. So the kid is reading this, right? The children are learning about this, and it brings a certain fear of the parent, like a very serious fear. I mean, the parent could, if you're rebellious against your parent, you could actually put to death. It's extremely serious. So I think there's a kind of a deterrent factor, that in order to the children to really, have a certain fear of their parents, even though we're never really going to do it. It's kind of like the Lubavitcher Rebbe would say, the best teacher is the one that has a stick, hangs it on the wall, never uses it. So point is, you want to instill some fear of punishment, but never have to actually mete it out. And similarly, I think that's kind of might be what this portion, this section is discussing. Like, it's putting it out there. If you rebel, your parents could, bring you to court. You could kill. But then we never really do it. And then we come up with all these conditions that we're not really doing it, but it's out there. So it creates a situation of maybe some fear in the children who are just studying the verses, but in reality, we never do it. So that's another take on it. But again, the sequence of events of how things, and that's, I always say that I think one of the biggest fears of doing a sin is, where is this going to lead? When a person breaks one thing, the doors, God forbid, that could open, the gates, because it gets harder. The person opens up certain desires and certain addictions, and the person then wants it more and does it again. It gets harder and harder to get out of it. And it could also lead to more perverse things, God forbid. So when a person does something wrong, and the opposite, a person should push themselves, should, how do I say, be enthusiastic about doing good deeds, because one good thing leads to another good thing. A person should be busy with good deeds. A person is busy with good deeds and holiness, then everything, things are not as hard, battles are not as difficult anymore. A person's mind is on holy good things. And, it's hard as not to lose his interest. And obviously also, if a person really has a desire to do good, how does it feel to go into synagogue when you did a sin or something? It doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good to be that person. So that's also like the person himself doesn't have a taste to do something wrong, because how can I do that bad, that ugly act? And then what, am I going to go open the Torah book then afterwards? I'm going to go to synagogue. It feels terrible. So the person has holy ambitions, it also deters them from doing something wrong, which would be contrary to the way that they want to be. So that's also quite helpful. But we see another thing from this segment talking about the rebellious son, that the importance of honoring parents and the importance of a parental authority in a Jewish society. It's extremely important and should not be minimized. And obviously, as we see today, very, very important that parents should be the teachers of their children and instillers of morality and discipline to their children. And that the children must respect their parents, and disrespect is not acceptable. And from that, the child learns good character. They learn how to follow authority, and so on. Now, how do we deal with the modern argument that sometimes authority is wrong, sometimes authority does bad things, and if you just follow them, then we're not going to fix any of the problems that may exist in a society that has people in authority that are misbehaving? So that's a good question, but we have to create that balance. I mean, because if we create a society in which, first and foremost, the children fear God and are studying Torah and know the right behavior, so they'll know that ultimately that a human authority is not the ultimate authority. They're only representatives. And if the child sees them doing things that are contrary to Torah, then they'll have the right moral, set of morals to know that they shouldn't follow, or if possible, to even, speak up about it. So, and it's so interesting because, and I think, I guess we'll finish with this point. If you look later on in Deuteronomy chapter 22, because we started this snowball effect of troubles was in chapter 21. Now, if you look in verse 6 of chapter 22, we have the opposite situation, in which a person does a relatively easy mitzvah, relatively good deed and commandment, right? What do? They come upon a bird's nest, and they want to take the eggs or the mother, but the Torah says, no, you have to shoo away the mother. You can't take them all. You shoo away the mother, and then you can take the eggs. She shouldn't see and be distressed, I guess. I mean, it doesn't exactly say that, but we can understand. It appears that that's a point there. Anyway, the point is the Torah says that you should do this. You should shoo away the mother, And then, not when the mother is hovering over the eggs and the chicks. You shouldn't take them. Send her away. Send her away, actually. So she should maybe even be sent away completely far. She should be sent flying away a bit. And then you can take the offspring in order that should be good for you, and you'll have a length of days. So Rashi brings from the sages that this is a very easy mitzvah. This isn't that hard. And for this mitzvah, a person is blessed that he will receive good in order that should be good for you, and you will be blessed with long life. So he says, if this mitzvah, how much more so others that are more difficult, like adultery and stealing, that it takes self-control. Really, it's not easy. You can imagine how much benefit and blessing a person gets from keeping them. Or more serious mitzvah, whether it's a Passover offering or the Sabbath or other things that are very serious positive commandments, how much more so will be the reward. And then it continues, and it says that if you build a new house, you should put a fence around it, around the top, around the roof, that in order that there should be no one should be harmed, lose their life from falling from your home. And the same thing from your field shouldn't have a mix of different crops, different a combination of vineyard and wheat and barley shouldn't be mixed together. So Rashi comments that if you follow the mitzvah of sending away the bird, God will bless you, and you'll be able to buy and build a home, and you'll be given fields in order to fulfill these other commandments. So we see that the result of doing a small mitzvah blessed him not only, first of all, led to doing other mitzvahs, but it's interesting, not only that, it led to, because the mitzvahs come about through physical possessions and physical positive, joyous occasions, so to speak. So Hashem blesses the person with these joyous things in order that he can fulfill the different commandments that are related to those things. So that means the chain of positive chains and events begins to happen. Person reached out and did this mitzvah, and the result is more mitzvahs, but not only more mitzvahs, but one's done through happy events and happy occasions. He ends up owning a home, and he ends up having fields, and so on and so forth. So you see the opposite. So that's the lesson to take away. What a better time to learn it than now. The snowball effect from doing something wrong, and on the other hand, the snowball effect of blessing for a positive way, doing something good. Lastly, I just mentioned that because I did mention something about the compassionate mercy in sending away the mother, that actually, though, our sages say that person shouldn't say that this mitzvah represents God's mercies. In the end of the day, it's a decree, and we don't know all the reasons behind sending away of the bird. Okay, that said, still, it is a compassionate act to do. So I think we can, basically, it is that, but it's not only that. There's more, evidently, there's more to it. There's more secrets, there's more, depths to this mitzvah, things that we don't understand. Also, point is, as always, is that it's not up to you to decide. Maybe the person will feel, no, I think it's be better if I take everybody, they can all stay together. Well, no, don't start figuring out what you think is more just and nicer and everything. The Torah says to do this. This is what you should be doing, whether or not you think it's more compassionate or not more compassionate. Okay, any questions or comments?